think the Israelis are just not happy with the terms at all. I think they want more freedom of movement than the agreement gives them in terms of where their forces would be and where they could operate. I think they want all hostages released without agreeing to a ceasefire, and what Hamas is pushing for. And the big change that was referred to in your story is that Hamas gave up on the idea of a complete end to the conflict and a sort of Israeli agreement that it won't go forward with any more major operations in Gaza in exchange for the gradual release of all the hostages. And I think that just there's too much distance between the sides. What Hamas agreed to is not its own terms, but Qatari and Egyptian terms. And the Israelis put themselves in this position by refusing to show up rather capriciously to the last round of talks in Cairo, and Prime Minister Netanyahu very unhelpfully insisting that a Rafah operation would go ahead with or without a deal. That probably was true, but there was no need to say it repeatedly over the past few days.
What's also been fascinating is the scenes of celebration in the Palestinian territories after Hamas accepted this deal. On the table is a proposal that could halt this 7-month-long war and bring those hostages home. But it seems like the closer that Netanyahu gets to a ceasefire deal, the faster he runs to avoid it. What do you make of the sabotage theory, the idea that he needs this war to continue for his own political survival?
Oh, I think it's obviously correct. Prime Minister Netanyahu wants nothing to do with a ceasefire or formalized end to the war. He wants the war to continue. Clearly, he believes that the best way to stay out of prison is to stay in power, and the best way to stay in power, at least in the meanwhile, in the short run, is for the war to continue and to be able to say to the Israelis, this is no time for an election, this is no time for a new government, this is no time for anything except a focus on the war. And so I think you can kind of rely on him to be very reluctant. On the other hand, both Hamas and the Israeli government and Netanyahu come under immense pressure from forces close to them. You see the reaction of the Palestinians in Gaza and all Palestinians to the idea that Hamas agreed to an end to the conflict without bothering too much about the specifics. The Palestinian people need an end to this, and they were delighted. And Hamas has been under quite a lot of pressure, especially Hamas leaders in Gaza, to accept anything remotely resembling reasonable terms. They didn't consult the people of Gaza before they attacked Israel, and in a sense, there is this sense that they've dragged people into this conflict. On the other hand, Netanyahu is under very heavy American pressure to come to terms, to accept anything reasonable, and to agree at least to a long-term ceasefire that Americans, I think, are hoping would lead to some kind of formalized end to hostilities and a broader agreement. I think everybody wants that, except for certainly the Israeli government and Netanyahu, and probably to a large extent also the Gaza Hamas leadership, Yahya Sinwar, and the people immediately around him, though the pressure on them is rather greater than it is on Netanyahu, I think.
So, Hussein, we now watch and wait for more insights into exactly where this conversation goes next. If this current ceasefire proposal can't stop a Rafah invasion, though, what will?
Well, I think the American demand that the 1.3 million Palestinians who've been driven, that is more than half of the population of Gaza, who've been driven south into the Rafah area, not just because they were fleeing for their lives, but also by deliberate Israeli policy. It was Israel's policy to make them flee there. Israel forced them, literally, forced them into the south. Now, they've all sort of been agglomerated, they've been congregated in these tent cities all around Rafah. And the idea that they would just then be attacked and massacred by Israel in the name of fighting Hamas is too much for the administration. So the U.S. has been very clear that Israel has to give the Palestinians somewhere credible to go, a greenfield site where there'll be water and food and some basic medicine, or let them go back north and begin reconstruction. And that's going to be very difficult for Israel to agree to, because it means much more humanitarian aid, and it means ultimately kind of agreeing to end the war. And it probably, especially the Greenfield side idea, or even humanitarian aid in the north,
Right.
means more tacit cooperation with UNRWA, the UN agency, which they branded ridiculously a terrorist group.